Welcome to Residential Tech Talks. I'm Jeremy Glowacki, Executive Editor of Residential Tech Today. In this episode, I'm joined by Dennis Erskine, founder of Erskine Group, a Colorado-based private cinema design build firm. Dennis helped shape several significant aspects of the residential technology integration industry and CEDIA as a global organization. He recently joined the esteemed ranks as a CEDIA Fellow, becoming only the 30th industry member to be selected by the CEDIA Board of Directors for this honor. Dennis, congratulations and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I enjoy talking to you, and I'm still in a state of shock over the award.
Well, I definitely want to talk about that. I too was shocked back in 2012 when I was given a call and told that I was getting it. And, it was really the first time that I had gotten any kind of industry recognition. I don't really strive for personal attention. I'm pretty introverted and, shy about stuff like that. But I can't lie. When I got it, it was a really great feeling to just have, realize that the board had taken note of my work, I guess. So as it turns out, those of you that are looking at video, you can look at the back there, and I have Forky hanging off of my fellow award just to keep me humble, because Forky thinks he's trash. And so, not to think that that I am so special, but I do really hold that in high esteem. And I just wondered, besides being shocked, how do you feel about getting that honor?
Well, what has come as a surprise is some of the messages and emails I've received from other people in the industry about things I contributed to the industry that I had no clue.
Okay.
It's like, okay. But when I got the call from the chairman, I'm thinking, I'm either being called into the principal's office or I'm being given homework.
Because you usually have a lot, you volunteer for so much. I'm sure there's always a call like that where you're getting more to do.
Yeah, it's sort of like volunteering in the military. Everybody stands back and you're left in the front of the line going, how did this happen?
I learned a new term. My wife said voluntold to do something.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, so I definitely want to talk about your background and career during our chat today, but I wanted to know how your work with CEDIA began. What was your first volunteer role or assignment with CEDIA?
Oh gosh, that was a long time ago. I think I did some education, teaching classes, proctoring the designer exam, and a few things like that. The first really intense effort I was involved with was to develop the home theater design specialist examination, which was eventually it didn't go anywhere, largely because the exam was a 2-day peer-reviewed exam. And so it would have been expensive to take, and finding a panel of peers who could spend 2 days challenging your assertions, much like a PhD, but that was the intent, was to have a PhD level course.
Okay.
And that's actually, when we're through with the 2 accredited certifications that we're working on now, that one's going to come back out of the box. And so we'll do that in networking. There's a lot of just bad information out there about the proper way to put together a home theater versus a home cinema. And I think the way I got started in this is when I first started in the business. In fact, the way it started was I had just sold my previous business to a large multinational company, and I and my partner were living in Atlanta with money in our pocket, wondering what to do next. And the very first CEDIA was being held that week.
Wow. Okay.
So we went there and said, aha, we can do this.
Mm.
And so we did the whole home thing. And over time, we were requested to do some theaters.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that drove me nuts was, why are we doing this? All it is a big TV. The experience doesn't replicate at all what you would expect to get in a first class theater.
Okay.
And so that's when I started saying, this has got to change.
Okay. Well, I want to take steps through your career, but you touched on the certification the efforts that you're doing, and you're the chairman of the CEDIA Certification Commission, which helped create the cabling and infrastructure technician certification and the integrated system technician certification, and improvements to CEDIA certification in general. Can you explain how important it is that all these efforts that you've been putting into this? Because I know there's been a bit of a back and forth as far as creating some sort of a barrier to entry, but without being exclusionary for the CEDIA membership. But you do need a standard. You need to have CEDIA mean something and have that certification. So what was, how much effort did you have to put in that to make this something that means something to people?
Well, it's a lot of work, but where CEDIA is going in their strategic plan, we've had certification for years, and oftentimes the feedback was, why? Nobody knows about it. What does it mean to a client? And so the purpose of the commission, it's really a quasi-separate organization from CEDIA itself, and it has to be to comply with ANSI and ISO rules. In other words, there has to be a brick wall between us and education. We can't tell them what's on the test. We can tell them what subjects matters are being covered. And the value of having ANSI and ISO accreditation for our certifications is that accreditation is like a manufacturer saying we're ISO 9001. So it has meaning to the markets that we wish to, the trades we wish to be peer with. It's architects, home builders, realtors, and so forth, that these certifications have international weight and recognition. They're not just some organization saying, we're going to come up with a certification so you guys can go around and put badges on your sleeve or something of that nature. This is serious stuff. And the process by which we determine what certifications are needed, to developing the exam, defining the job that we're trying to exam, is all subject to some very stringent rules and auditing by ANSI. And that also feeds in parallel to the fact that CEDIA is now an ANSI standards development organization. So we've filled that strategic goal of being the organization that sets the standards for our industry. We're not beholden to some third party out there that is aligned with our industry. It's not saying we ignore them, but it's saying our standards are our standards. They are ANSI, ISO accredited, and we're here, we're serious, and we intend to put professionalism out in the field.
How did you realize this was the way that you needed to do it, like that the ANSI standard had to be there? Was this something that you learned just as your leadership kind of grew as a chairman and board of directors member over the years? Did you hear basically from the manufacturing side, like this is how our standards work, or where do you realize that this is the way to go? Or is it the educational leadership within the CEDIA organization that figured it out and kind of led the way?
Well, there were a couple of things that came to play here. One is when the strategic plan came out with the 3 legs of the stool, and that our leadership and so forth, there's no way to achieve that unless what you put out into the public domain carry some sort of international weight, that we're not fooling around. We're just not kids playing with toys. This is a serious profession, and it fit well into workforce development, and it worked well into standards development. And where this came to me was I was always very not happy with the quality of tests that were given. I wasn't happy with the fact that what you had to do to renew that certification often had nothing to do with the certification. So you could have certification X, and that industry changes, and you start taking courses about A, B, and C. That doesn't keep you current, and it doesn't match what you would get as an electrician or a plumber or something of that nature.
Okay.
But going much further back, I was involved developing telecommunication standards for what was then called CCITT, which is now ITU. And that's when the process of developing standards and the meaning behind the standard once it was developed came very, very clear to me as to its importance and what it did for business. And so that got to the point where the thing that we need to do going forward then is to change our certification to be meaningful, not just to our members, but the trades that we're working with.
Right. Okay. So take us back to that time when you you had a company that you sold. You worked in the telecom space. You had a stint there with Holiday Inns Worldwide. I'm curious about that. Several different stops there before you got into the residential tech space, as we know, at the CEDIA channel. So what, maybe we could start with childhood kind of goals. Were you a techie kid, big into science? What kind of led you into the tech industry, the first part of your tech industry background?
I was big into science all through junior high and high school. My declared major at the university was physics. One of the things that happened back then, there was no such thing as a course called computer sciences, but your coursework, you had to do programming. And the possibility of what you could do with programming stuck with me. I ended up working for a short guy with big ears, H. Ross Perot.
Oh, wow.
And spent several years with EDS. And that's where I learned the biggest problem with Friday was that there were 2 working days till Monday. I worked on projects there for NASA, as in the government services side, for the Western Area Power Administration, for Saudi Arabian Education Mission, and for the U.S. Army ARADS project and the Postal Cab Sunset project, all massive projects. But I viewed myself as an innovator, and I wasn't really concerned with what we were trying to do, but why we were trying to do it. Because why would tell me what the approach was to solve the problem. What would not do that.
Okay.
And then I moved on to what was then a subsidiary of ITT, which was at that point a massive conglomerate. And we developed the first commercially available electronic messaging system. And we did innovations such as the ability to, we sold these systems to PTTs. So the Deutsche Bundespost, Israeli PTT, to British Telecom, Hutchison Whampoa, and so forth. So it was international. And we innovated by allowing you to send and originate and receive telexes on electronic mail. We were experimenting with text to voice. So this was the kind of innovation that I got serious about. And
for just a little frame of reference, around what year or time period would that have been?
Oh my gosh, this would have been the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay, early on in that stuff.
Yeah, and our clientele were, well, the Secret Service,
wow.
Pepsi, Coca-Cola, large corporations. About that, after doing that for a while, Bell Canada brought their what they call INET service to the United States, and I was brought on to that organization. And I liked what they were doing because one of the things that they did is you could free form a question. Like an example would be, what are the laws in Illinois with regard to a radar speeding ticket within 100 feet of a metal sign?
Okay.
And we would then send out that to Westlaw, LexisNexis, and other databases.
Okay.
And then compose an English language response to everything that we found and deliver that back to the attorney.
Wow. Okay. So this was pre-internet time where
Pre-internet, there was no internet. In fact, at the time, colleagues of mine were in fact working at Park on the development of the internet and testing it. And I was very close to them. In fact, many of them were on the standards committees with me.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that was all before all of that. But that was the sort of innovation that I was looking for.
Sure.
There's sort of a funny story about that. I was invited to go to a major computer manufacturer's facility and interview to be in charge of their SQL database development section. And that would have made me the secretariat of the ANSI relational database committee, standards committee. And so at the end of the interview, they offered me the job and said, is there anything your current employer could do to keep you there? And I said, look, I'm the highest ranked non-Canadian working for a Canadian telephone company. There is no chance that they're going to promote me to vice president. So I'm back in the office. I'm proofreading my letter of resignation.
Okay.
My boss walks into the office and I hide this letter under the desk. He says, I thought I'd just tell you the board just met and they're promoting you to vice president.
Oops.
So I'm going, oh my God.
Wow.
But eventually, Bell decided to roll that operation back up into Canada. And I was given the opportunity to visit Ottawa and see how much I'd enjoy living in Canada.
Oops.
The problem
what time
is
of year?
They brought me up in February in the middle of a blizzard.
Not a good idea. Yeah.
Bad planning. So I elected to stay behind and close down the facilities, organize the sell off of things like the office furniture and the massive Northern Telecom electronic phone switch and other assets, the computers and so forth.
And where was that office?
That office was in Chantilly, Virginia.
Okay. So right there in the whole government sector.
Yeah, it was pretty much government sector. And again, our customers were not individuals.
Yeah.
It was all corporate. Our biggest customer, this is scary. Our biggest customer was the American Bar Association. So if you're to be sued, do you think you could find an unbiased judge anywhere on planet Earth? Not a chance. So anyway, we were given permission, I and a fellow who became a partner and worked with me for years, and said, I have an idea to fix the fundamental customer interface problems that hotels and that hotel chains have. And so we developed a system for central reservations that was linked real time using two-phase commit to the hotel properties. So we could measure the value of a real customer. We could keep track of things. The example was Dr. Sugihara checks into a Holiday Inn. in Iwakuni, Japan. He says, I'm allergic to down. I need to have a foam pillow. He can then, and this is all entered in katana. He flies the next morning to LA, goes to the Holiday Inn, and says, hi, I'm Dr. Sugihara. I'd like a room.
Mm-hmm.
It would come up on the screen just like this, translated into English. I see Dr. Sugihara, you stayed in Iwakuni last night. We'll have a foam pillow set up to your room. And we thought it was pretty cool. We tested it at a few hotels. The next thing that happened was La Quinta had us compete to replace their front desk and reservation systems. They told us, said at the end, you really won this, but we can't use you because you're such a small company that if something goes wrong, we couldn't afford to recover from such a big disaster. And the next one came from Best Western. And we were the two finalists. And they brought us in for a test where people from various departments would come in and say, we want this change. And they'd want to know how long it'd take and then see it. And instead of taking days using conventional programming as opposed to a relational database, we were doing it in hours. And Holiday Inn got word that this was about to happen. And so they flew up to Chantilly, Virginia, where we were officed, and said, we're buying the company.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And so they didn't want it. They didn't want a competitor really to have that system. They wanted to have it themselves. And so that's where Steve and I got moved to Atlanta.
Okay.
And with a pocket full of cash after we did our indentured servitude.
Right.
And there was CEDIA having an expo. And this looks cool, man. It's programming. How tough can it be?
Right. Absolutely. So little did you know, but then I want to talk more about that and how you got into the design world that you are in now. But first, I want to take a brief break for a word from our sponsor.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Residential Tech Talks. Today's show is brought to you by WhyReboot. WhyReboot specializes in creating commercial-grade networks that address the demand of advanced control and automation technologies for residential, commercial, and luxury marine environments. WhyReboot systems are comprised of the best gear in the industry, including the Paramount Access Point Mount, developed for integrators and interior designers. To learn more, go to WhyReboot.com and AccessPointMount.com.
Welcome back. I'm talking to 2020 CEDIA Fellow Dennis Erskine. Dennis, you were starting to talk about how Atlanta, you were in Atlanta and your first CEDIA, and how it just seemed like the easiest thing in the world to get into this industry. So you're able to walk around a exhibit hall, and what were your impressions there that first time you ever encountered it?
It was pretty interesting. One of the classes I took there was back when Joe Kane and Joe Silver were teaching calibration. And that opened my eyes to, wow, there's more to this than what you would think on the surface. And that's what got us to dig in and begin to understand and get aligned with vendors. Okay. And that's when I met Larry Pixton for the first time, not face to face, but I tried to become a dealer for Triad speakers. And they said, well, are you a CEDIA member? No. How long you've been in the business? 6 months.
Even though it was really like 6 hours.
Yeah, so we joined CEDIA and had a chat with Larry, and we became a Triad dealer. So
okay. Now, were you initially a straightforward custom integrator, or did you go into theater sort of?
No, we were a custom integrator, sort of the whole home. This was before flat panels, and we do lighting controls and automation. We were doing Crestron and Lutron at the time. And we had some clients not a large number in terms of percentage that wanted a home theater, what they called then a home theater. And I was very disappointed in what home theater was. I mean, why are you spending all this money for what is essentially a big TV?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any better sound. You just have a bigger picture that sometimes isn't as bright as it ought to be.
Right.
And so I started digging into the physics behind how this works, things I saw that could be better. And that's when basically, Steve and I went different directions. He stayed in the programming, and he's a guy who spoke ones and zeros anyway. And I started moving into, I want to do home theaters right. I want to do private cinemas. It's not the brand of the gear. It's not the prettiness of the speakers that counts. It's the experience that people get from the result.
Sure.
And I felt they were not getting that.
Mm.
And so that's when I started doing design only. In fact, I refused to sell equipment.
Okay.
And some of my clients, after the design work, they're very happy with what they got, but they said, why won't you sell us the stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm afraid that if I am a dealer for X, Y, and Z, that if I recommend one of those products, it's because I'm selling the product, not because it's the right product for the room.
Okay.
And my clients universally came back and said, no, we never would have thought that, because we worked through the design and so forth process with you that wasn't a problem. So that's when I started doing the equipment. And when we started looking at requirements that were just totally overlooked by everybody in the industry, you got 6 people in the room. That's 3,000 BTUs an hour of cooling that you need.
Mm.
So how are you going to survive in a room that doesn't have a return?
Right.
How are you going to get enough air into that room without noisy diffusers on the ceiling? If the softest sound recorded on a soundtrack is 22 dB, how are you going to hear it when the background noise in the quiet house is 33 dB?
Right.
So that's when we got into sound isolation and studying all that stuff, particularly the work that Sean Always and Fred Toole did up in Canada.
Okay.
And one of the things we discovered very quickly is that no matter how specific the plans are, 99.999% of the home builders or remodelers didn't follow them.
Oh, wow.
We would do things like, say, drywall and then build the raised platform. They'd say, that's nonsense. We don't understand doing that. We're just going to build a raised platform. And what they did in the process is they violated the sound isolation protocol.
Right.
And so it got to the point where a different Steve and I got together. He was a very, very good remodeler, furniture maker, and so forth, and said, we've got to build these right. And that's how we got together. And so now we're in the position where we start with the design and specification, then we move on to doing the construction ourselves to make sure it is done right, it's done properly. And in the end, today, these rooms are being built to 1 millimeter accuracy.
Wow.
Because we're using CNC machines. And on average, you've seen some of the pictures of the rooms we do. Mm-hmm. On average, we were on site 20 days from studs to turning it over to the customer.
That's quick.
And it's not because we're fast, it's because we do this every single day of the year. We know what we're doing, we know what's coming next, we know what the obstacles are. And we know Mrs. Mutsey doesn't want us traipsing in and out of her house for 3 months.
Sure. Now, are you selling product now, or are you still
Yes.
partnering with integrators? So you do the whole thing.
Yeah, we sell the product. Some of it's pro product. We buy a lot of our amplifiers and DSPs from QSC Audio. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that somebody says, what speaker should I use in my room? I said, I haven't designed the car yet. I don't know how big the engine has to be.
Okay.
And so the equipment specification is based upon the technical requirements of the room and the number of people in it and so forth. So that's where we're at.
So now I'm sure that you've seen a lot change technically, product-based, standards-based, whatever it is throughout the years. But I'm imagining something like Dolby Atmos has been probably the biggest change for you, or is there something else that affected the way you?
Well, there were two big changes, and currently the biggest change that has really enhanced the experience, the biggest two, are Dolby Atmos, DTSX, this whole envelopment thing. That has really brought sound in these rooms to a real high level of experience. The second, of course, is HDR, if in fact you're actually capable of putting it on the screen, which most projectors can't do. But the bigger change came, and it's an interesting story how it came about. I was on a home theater cruise with Don Stewart and Sam Runco. And they were sitting together, and I sort of interrupted myself between them and said, this is what the world needs now. I said, Don, can you build a curved masking screen? I said, sure, we can do that. What do you need it for? I says, because if you use an anamorphic lens, you're going to get a slight barrel, and the curve would take that out. The other thing is projectors aren't too bright. So what happens is that old angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection is putting too much light splay on the walls, not into the seating. And then I went to Sam and said, Sam, what you need to do is you need in a projector to be able to take a widescreen format and electronically make it tall. So everybody's tall and skinny. And then slide an anamorphic lens in front of that to stretch it back out to give you the real cinematic experience.
Right.
Sam didn't say he could do that. He just played Sam. He looked me straight in the eye, said, how many can you sell?
Oh, God. Yeah. I can hear that.
So those are the big things that really changed what was going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a true theater screen then when that happens. And the curve. So do you it seems that things, you don't necessarily need the anamorphic lens anymore. Is that all done optically?
Oh, yes, you do.
You do. Okay.
You do, unless you have a 2.39:1 aspect ratio chip, or 2.37. Then you don't need the lens anymore.
Right.
But if you're stuck with a 16:9 format chip, then you need that electronic change, and you need the anamorphic lens to get that to fill the full screen. And some people say, well, it's cheaper to zoom. Well, wait a minute. If you're zooming, you're still losing a third of your resolution, because that's still that narrow strip. You're losing a third of your light output, and the last thing you need on a bigger picture is less light output. So there's a whole bunch of things wrong with that approach. But I recognize that not everybody can put up 10 grand for an anamorphic lens. So there you go.
So you make adjustments as necessary, compromises if you have to, but you do have the high standard, which is you would prefer to have that anamorphic lens to do it that way.
Yeah, I'd prefer to have a projector with a CinemaScope aspect ratio chip.
Well, okay, sure.
Yeah, but the way I approach clients is much like a doctor would approach a patient, where I suggest this is what we need to do. When the customer comes back with any number of reasons that he'd rather do this.
Right.
My job at that point in time is to tell him the pros and cons of doing it my way, and the pros and cons of doing it his way from a technical perspective, and allow them then to make an informed decision.
So beyond the technical part of it, how much of the aesthetics do you control, or do you work with a designer as well in terms of the theme, for lack of a better term, the design elements like the color scheme and the materials and that sort of thing in the theater?
It's very rare that that happens. We've got some large projects going on in California and Austin, Texas, that are new builds. And all of our clients are by referral. And in each of these two cases, the homeowner has told the architect and the interior designer that that room is none of their business. And what we try to do is look at what the designer and architect is trying to do with the rest of the house, and at least incorporate some of that into the room. So there's continuity there. Of course, clients are saying, look, the house is mid-century modern, but we want our theater to be 1849 San Francisco Bordello, which is fine, but it's what the customer wants, and we can deal with that.
But do you have that? Where do you get that part of your skill set? Because that seems like more of a, you know, you're from more of a science and engineering sort of background, and it seems like there's a, I don't know, there's an art to some of that, you know, that aesthetic. Is that something that you had to develop over time, or it comes naturally, or is it just computer based?
Yeah, I guess it comes somewhat naturally, but on the other hand, when I was at university, like many people, I had to work, and I ended up working in an advertising agency in the creative department. So some of those skills were picked up there.
Okay. Interesting. From
the graphic arts perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm proud to say I can still use a ruling pen without dripping ink.
So you're not the only one that's a very specific sort of, I don't know if design build is always the case, but theater designer. There are others out there. Are you friendly with those guys, or are you guys sworn enemies because you compete in the same space?
Tony and Gramani and I are friends, have been for a long time.
Someone like Sam Cavitt's out there too, and
yeah, Sam Cavitt. I haven't had a lot of interaction with Sam except at CEDIA shows and training classes and so forth like that.
Yeah.
But I think the difference between those two guys and us is that we're in a position to control the entire process from the start to turning it over to the customer. So we don't have to rely upon an unknown builder to do the construction, or try to teach an HVAC contractor why it is that the supplies must be high mounted in the front and had to be guardrails. And I'm not interested in cubic feet per minute. I'm interested in velocity, not the amount of air. And so, and having, 15 years of running into obstacles, steel beams we didn't know were there. We have the experience to overcome unforeseen circumstances.
And you were, you had a bit of an inside track in that you're so involved with CEDIA, but the fact that one of your theaters is in the new CEDIA headquarters, which is just a beautiful facility, and that space is amazing. That you must be pretty proud to have your work represented there for anyone that's able to come in. Of course, right now, not too many with COVID, but that must be an amazing accomplishment.
It was, and in fact, to keep everything legit, we had to submit a proposal, just like the other people who were interested. And then when the decisions were being made, I had to excuse myself from the room. It was okay. I could go down to the bar then, But so I had no input into the selection process. I think one of the reasons that we won the award was that we were the only company submitting a bid that was full turnkey, where we did the construction in that room. And that just resolved a whole bunch of problems apparently for CEDIA.
Well, I spoke off the record to some people that were in that decision-making process. I'll just say it was one person, so over exaggerate too much, but he said that the other proposals were cute compared to yours. So,
okay.
that kind of puts it in a nutshell as far as how much higher level your design was, and that there was really no doubt about that being the chosen project.
Right.
So
Well, I wouldn't have had access to that kind of information.
no, I understood that it was all on the up and up, but that's really cool, and it's great that I'm local to that facility and I can go in and see it again when things are allowed to happen like that again. Speaking of which, how has COVID-19 changed your work, if at all, because of how you do things from a maybe
It
design?
really hasn't changed our work. The one thing I am seeing is that we're getting more demand for our product.
Okay.
And I think that has to do with the fact that people are becoming quarantined at home, and the 65-inch TV on the wall doesn't cut it for them.
Right.
And from a family perspective, in fact, we have one client whose second residence was at a mountain resort, ski resort. His primary residence was on the East Coast. And because of all that's going on, he's making the second residence his primary residence and physically moving there full time. And we're putting in a really serious theater for him.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So are you, had you been traveling much to do projects outside of Colorado before COVID, or is it mostly just within the state?
It's very rare that we get a project within our state.
Oh, really? Everything's out of state. So are you still traveling during all this time?
Well, I don't do as much traveling as what the installation and construction team does.
Okay, so you have a whole team that has to go do that.
I don't really need to do that, and they aren't traveling by air because what they've got is a truck and a large trailer that all of their tools and stuff are in. And on the second trip, for example, all the interior moldings we do on our CNC machines, and we stain them in our paint booth and then seal them front, back, and on the edges so we don't have shrinkage and expansion during humidity changes.
Okay.
And so all that stuff is put in the trailer and hauled out, and then we assemble it on site. There's no reason for me to be there, particularly because they know I believe that manual labor is a spectator sport. And if I were there, they'd want to put me to work.
Right, of course. And given your current appearances, the grizzled old guy in Colorado, they may mistake you for Santa Claus when you're there. So you don't want to do that, right?
Yeah. Or a hippie or something.
Or a hippie. Yeah, there you go. Well, I did want to touch on one last thing, which is that one of the anecdotes about your life is that you're a licensed commercial pilot and flight instructor. So are you still doing that?
I haven't done it since I moved to Colorado.
Okay.
Obviously, with a 50-year-old home that I bought, that my father at 92 couldn't keep up with, there's a lot of work that I have to do around here. The infrastructure is rather amazing in this house. It consists of 2 POTS lines.
Oh, God. Yeah, so you got your work cut out for you, huh?
Well, I'm trying to convince Ken that they need to do a boot camp on retro wiring. And my house could be what they do it on. And so I figured that'd be pretty cool. I could get paid for somebody to wire my house.
There you go. Now you're thinking.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Dennis, on that note, I wanted to just thank you for taking the time out today to chat with us and give us so much background. And again, congratulations on the CEDIA Fellow Award.
Well, thank you. And I saw the list of the other 30 and going, do I really belong here?
Oh, you do. Your name has come up a lot over the years with a lot of important changes and improvements with CEDIA, and I think you're more deserving than I was. So there you go. But thank you again. And also thanks to everybody for joining us. Be sure to comment, share, or subscribe to the podcast. And you can check out all the latest residential tech news at restechtoday.com. Until next time, please stay safe, stay inspired, and let us know if you have a great story to tell.
Residential Tech Talk, lighting specialist to residential tech.
Home automation, smart device, home or smart house.